All right, this video will discuss tips and matching tips to make sure you're using the correct size. So what I've done is I've taken a tip that's commonly found on a surface cleaner, the tips from the bars from this, because these will get clogged up or just over time they get so worn down that you got to change them out. And when you're changing them out, it's important that you use the right tip, because if you don't use the right tip, then you could incidentally blow up the engine because you're putting too much stress on the engine because you're using the wrong tip. So that's why it's important to understand what these numbers mean. So you'll see on the side here, I know you can't see it on the video, but this tip has a 25-25. So it's got 4 numbers, and so you need to know what those 4 numbers represent. The first 2 numbers of those 4 represent the fan size. So when it comes to pressure washing, the fan size are standard. It's a 0-degree tip, which is basically just a strong stream, a straight stream. And then you got a 25-degree tip, which kind of fans it out a little bit more. And then you have a 40-degree tip, which fans it out even more. And then lastly, you have a 65-degree tip, which fans it out obviously even more. So the farther you fan out, the less pressure you're going to achieve. So the first 2 numbers just represent whatever that fan size is. The second 2 numbers represent the pump size. So in this case, as you can see, this surface cleaner, the bar has 4 tips, 1, 2, 3, 4. They either come in 4 tips or 2 tips. So in this case, we have 4 tips. The last 2 numbers is 2, 5. So what we need to do, because there's 4 tips, we need those tips to add up to at least 8. Because the machine running that surface cleaner is an 8-gallon-a-minute machine. So the last 2 numbers multiplied by 4 tips, have to equal at least 8 or greater. So in this case, this is a 25-25 tip. So if I put 4 on there, 25 times 4 is 10. So that will work for this because it equals at least 8. It's very important that you know that. So again, you don't mess up the engine by putting on a tip that's too small, and now you're putting too much stress on that engine without realizing it. Another reason that we'll use tips is for sealing, and we'll put the tip on the end of this wand here. And we typically either use, for sealing, we'll use a 1-gallon-a-minute pump or a 2-gallon-a-minute pump. This pump right here is a 1-gallon-a-minute pump. So on this tip here, we need to make sure that it equals out to 1 gallon a minute. So in this case, this tip is a 65-10. The 65, remember, that represents the fan size, and the 10-1 equals 1 gallon a minute pump. So this tip will be fine for this pump. I'm sorry, this pump here, because this is a 1 gallon a minute pump. If we're using a 2 gallon a minute pump while we're sealing, you can use a 65-20 tip, or you can even use a 65-15 if you needed to, but it would be ideal to use a 65-20 because remember, you want it to add up to the pump size. But for sealing, we kind of cheat a little bit. We go a little bit smaller. We use a 65-15 tip on the 2 gallon a minute pumps. That's okay, but remember, ideally, you want it to add up to whatever the pump size is. We can get away with it on the seal cart a little bit more than we could on a pressure washing cart. But ideally, you want it to equal out to whatever that pump size is or more.